Hello and welcome back to another Walking Dead video, and today we'll be reviewing The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 1 Episode 3. And this is the episode where things really kick off and Daryl and everyone finally get to Paris. The plot of this episode is very simple and is about Daryl and the nuns getting to Paris, meeting this whole new community. We see some cool Paris locations. And it is about our guys being like, okay, we've got here, now we got to get Daryl back to America. And that's the focus, trying to find a boat for Daryl. And this episode really does introduce a lot of characters. We get reintroduced to Isabelle's old boyfriend, I think his name's Quinn. And we get introduced to this whole new community and all these other major characters. And it looks like all these characters are now going to be a part of the next 3 episodes. So this is another big introduction episode. So it's not like Dead City, but all the major players get introduced in episode 1 or 2. We're halfway through and we could still get introduced to new characters, which is quite interesting. I do sadly have to say, I personally don't believe this is as strong as the previous episode, and this episode does have some moments where I feel like it was a bit weird. Like the start of this episode starts off with Daryl and his little group of nuns. They go to this random town, they meet this random musician. You get this cool scene with the musician playing music with the walkers, and then you have Daryl be like, screw this, we're going straight to Paris, and they just stop doing any more details. And it really felt like there was meant to be an episode there. Like, why did we bother having that random point over the first 5 minutes being about Daryl and everyone going to this random theatre to meet this crazy guy, and then being like, yeah, we're just going to leave and go straight to Paris? I felt like you should have done more there, but maybe that would take away and it could have been a filler episode. So I feel like the first few minutes of this episode are completely skippable. Really, you could have just started this episode with them outside of Paris, because the first few minutes just felt kind of pointless. And I do have to say that this episode does have some moments where I feel there are pointless times, and I feel like the pacing is a little off this episode. The last 2 episodes were over an hour long, and they didn't feel like it. They were done well, perfect from start to finish, paced amazing. This episode is a little shorter, and I feel like there was a bit filler in this episode. You have times where these characters are just talking about their things, you got a lot of these reintroductions, and I feel like this episode is just a bit too slow at times, and it feels like there's a calm before. That's what this episode really is. It's like the calm before the next 3 episodes start off, because this episode is in a weird place where it finishes the objective that Daryl and Laurent, Isabelle and Sylvie had from episode 1. They get to Paris, and this episode is about setting up the objective for the next 3 episodes, and that's really what this episode is. It's just kind of a rest bite, and it's definitely going to be the most fillery of these 6 episodes, I feel, because there's nothing really much happening in this episode other than they get to Paris, and then right at the end of the episode it sets up the new problem they have to deal with in the last 3 episodes. And personally, I think they did get to Paris a little too quickly. I felt like maybe at the end of this episode they should have got to Paris. We should have had 2 episodes of them travelling to see parts of France, because we had this massive roadmap at the start of episode 1, and we saw one of their stops, and none of that. And we don't know how much time's been between the episodes, so we haven't seen their relationship grow. And we just had at the start of this episode where Isabelle was like, you're a friend to me, Daryl, and stuff like that. Like, oh, he's a friend. But we haven't really seen that relationship grow too much, just because all of that traveling's happened mostly off screen. That's a little nitpick. I feel like we should have seen maybe 1 more episode on the road to see their relationship and all these bonds happen. Even though I'm not as happy with this episode as the previous 2, it still has some amazing locations. We get Paris, and it really does feel like The Last of Us, seeing this overgrown city, and I really love the aesthetics, and this is definitely the best looking episode, because the previous 2, one was in a monastery or in the woods, and they were all about castles. The first 2, you had castles. We have Paris, and we get to see Eiffel Tower, we get to see some iconic locations in France, and it's absolutely amazing. I really like the cinematography and the way this show looks. We get some really cool shots. There is also this nightclub, like underground sewer nightclub in this episode, and it really doesn't feel like The Walking Dead. And I did complain about this in Dead City, because you had this diner on the side of this random road and people would just be like, hey, stop by, come here, have a shower and stuff like that. That felt weird. However, I felt like it worked in this show, and I really liked this aspect of Paris is still alive. It's just underground, and you still have all these communities, and you still have nightclubs and stuff like that. I feel like it worked in this show, and it really makes the Walking Dead universe feel like it's evolving, and society's come back because you have these random, like, nightclubs in the middle of cities still. And when I saw them go to the nightclub, I was like, wow, the world definitely feels alive. In The Walking Dead, it felt like you have a few communities around, and that's it. Outside of the walls of those communities, there is nothing. However, in this show, outside the walls of communities, you could have a nightclub down the road. I quite like the vibe that is, and Daryl really felt like he was out of place. I really liked how Daryl just looked out of place, because you had this character who hasn't seen any of this, because in America, apparently the world hasn't really rebuilt that much, unless you're near New York. And then in France, you have these communities all over the place. I just quite like the little thing like that. I do also have to mention we get more burner walkers, and I love that they're just not just in one episode. They are a constant threat, and it seems like a lot of the walkers we are facing in this are the variants. We're not getting the normal walkers as often, like Daryl. These characters are coming down, and they're surrounded by all these walkers just falling down from the roof, and they're trying to escape from Isabelle's old house. And I like how Daryl sees a burner walker, and he just uses it to burn their way out. Like, you can see Daryl using his, like, brains, and he's like, okay, I can't cut through this. However, we have walkers that are acidic as hell. Let's just burn our way through it. I really like Daryl just being super smart in that moment. And we do see the main villains. We have our main villain, who is the totally not CRM girl. She doesn't really do much. She just kind of chills at her base. And then we get the tattoo guy. I'm not very good at his name. Sorry. And I really like him. I feel like he's such a great personal villain. He's been set on this mission by this girl who lied that Daryl killed his brother. And I like that he is not just this big, bad, evil for evil's sake. No, he just wants revenge. He thinks this man killed his brother. And so we find out in this episode that these two villains we have, one chasing Daryl from the north, one chasing Daryl from the south, they are not connected. They are two different groups. We have this weird, they look like the CRM. I wouldn't be surprised if they are CRM. She's dressed in black. She's doing research on the walkers, and we see how burner walkers are made. So burner walkers aren't natural. There seems to be something you do to a walker to turn it into a burner walker. And the walker we see they're researching on is also a runner, and it's a super strong walker able to pull chains out of a wall. So I can't wait for Daryl to meet the steroid walker, is what I'm going to call it, because that is not just a normal runner or burner walker. It can run, it can pull things out of walls. It's a super strong walker. We heard there will be strong variants. It seems like this show is going mad with variants. We are not just getting runners and burners. We're going to get variants that are super strong, and we're going to get one that is like all of them. We're going to get like these steroid walkers, basically tanks. I cannot wait to see those variants. I'm really excited about that, but I call it here. There's definitely going to be a point where the main villain and the Daryl personal villain, I'm counting the CRM lady as the main villain because she's the definite evil member, and they're going to go back against each other. That's what I think. Like, they team up in this episode. I think eventually the personal villain for Daryl is going to realise Daryl didn't kill his brother and he's being used. So maybe there'll be a little redemption arc, or Daryl's just going to kill him. I hope there is a redemption arc, because he's not bad. He's just wanting to get revenge for a man he thinks he killed his brother. So hopefully he isn't just murdered, and Daryl and him do come to agreement, or he realises that Daryl isn't this murderer. That's what I really, really hope happens, because I do quite like him. But at the end of this episode, I do want to talk about, it really sets up the next 3 episodes. We have Laurent kind of running away because Daryl and Isabelle have a fight. A lot of things happen near the end of this episode, where we find out Laurent's real father. We find out all these things. Isabelle's like kind of all over the place after what's happened. Daryl's about to leave. They have a fight. Laurent overhears and runs away. They're convenient at the same time. People break into their community and just start chasing down Daryl. We get a cool fight on the roof with Daryl and his personal villain. I'm not very good at names, so I'm going to call him Tattoo Man. And that was quite cool. We had some very convenient men shooting so that Daryl doesn't kill him. It's only episode 3. And then he runs off without being hit at all. Stormtrooper aim, I might add. And this episode really does set up that it's no longer going to be copying The Last of Us. Like Radio Terror did say, it does start off very similar to The Last of Us, but it does really deviate in the story. And he's correct. After this episode, the plot is all about everyone trying to find Laurent now. Like, you have all these angles. You have the CRM lady trying to find Laurent, because apparently it's out that he's special. You have his biological father trying to find Laurent. You have Daryl and the nun trying to find Laurent. And you also have this man trying to hunt down Daryl. So it looks like the next 3 episodes are all going to be around Paris. So there's a lot to do in Paris. It's no longer a traveling show. It's all centered inside the city, which is quite cool. And it's all about trying to get to Laurent first. And everyone's on a race against time, which is very, very interesting. Like, this episode doesn't do as much as the previous 2, but it really set up a really cool and interesting plot. I also really quickly want to mention that I'm really happy that The Walking Dead and AMC no longer have that language issue, because in The Walking Dead it was notorious for clunky dialogue when they're trying to get around the big F word. So I'm very, very happy that these new spin-offs do not care, because we're getting F words in every episode, and the dialogue is just better now because you don't have our characters trying to get around saying rude words on TV. So I'm quite happy that that is no longer an issue, because it really does add to these emotional moments in episodes and add to these characters. But let's move on to one sentence, that's one word overall review. And to say, this is a great episode, and give it an 8 out of 10. It is not as good as the last 2, but it is still a great episode, and I really did enjoy this from start to finish. I felt it was a bit slow at times, but it was enjoyable throughout. But please tell me down below, what did you think about this episode? Did you love it? Did you hate it? And what would you rate it out of 10? But this is it for me today, so goodbye, peace out, and I'll see you in my next video.